The millionaire was paralyzed when he saw a painting of his missing loved one in the farmer's house. The Texas sun hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the sprawling fields as Daniel Harper's sleek black car wound its way down the dusty country road. His eyes, weary from years of searching and disappointment, swept over the vast landscape with a practiced disinterest. This was just another stop on his seemingly endless business trip, another set of farms to evaluate for purchase, adding to his already massive portfolio. But Daniel's heart wasn't in it. It hadn't been for a long time. At 45, Daniel Harper was a man who seemed to have it all. The CEO of Harper Industries, a multinational conglomerate, he had amassed a fortune that most could only dream of. His name graced the covers of business magazines, his face a fixture at high-profile events. To the outside world, he was the epitome of success, a self-made billionaire with the Midas touch. Yet, as he sat in the back of his luxury car, Daniel felt the familiar emptiness gnawing at him. The weight of the past 2 decades pressed down on his shoulders, a constant reminder of what he had lost, or rather, who he had lost. Elena Parker. The name still sent a jolt through him, even after all these years. She had been his everything, the love of his life, the woman he was going to marry, and then in the blink of an eye she was gone. Vanished without a trace, leaving behind nothing but questions and a hole in Daniel's heart that no amount of success or wealth could fill. Mr. Harper, his driver's voice crackled through the intercom, pulling him from his reverie. We're approaching the next property. Daniel cleared his throat, straightening his tie. Thank you, James. I think I'll walk from here. Wait for me at the main house. As the car slowed to a stop, Daniel stepped out, the warm Texas air enveloping him. He stood for a moment, letting the silence of the countryside wash over him. It was a stark contrast to the bustling city life he was accustomed to, and for a brief instant he felt a flicker of peace. But it was fleeting. As he began to walk down the dirt path, his mind drifted back to the reason for this trip. Harper Industries was looking to expand its agricultural division, and these farms were prime candidates for acquisition. It was a sound business move, one that would undoubtedly increase the company's profits. Yet Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that he was going through the motions. Every decision, every acquisition, every victory in the boardroom, it all felt hollow. Because at the end of the day, he would return to an empty penthouse, haunted by memories of a future that never came to be. As he walked, Daniel's thoughts turned to his sister, Isabella. She had been calling incessantly over the past few days, demanding to know the details of his trip to Texas. A voice, sharp and insistent, grated on his nerves. Isabella had always been ambitious, always pushing for more, but lately her interest in his business dealings had taken on a more aggressive tone. Daniel sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. The relationship with his sister had become strained over the years, marked by a coldness that he couldn't quite explain. There were times when he caught a glimmer of something in her eyes, a mixture of guilt and defiance, that made him wonder if there was more to Elena's disappearance than he knew. But he pushed those thoughts aside. He had spent years investigating, hiring private detectives, following every lead, no matter how small. And every time he came up empty-handed. Elena had vanished into thin air, taking with her all of Daniel's hopes for the future. As he crested a small hill, Daniel caught sight of a modest farmhouse in the distance. It was a far cry from the opulent mansions he was used to, but there was something about its simplicity that drew him in. Without really knowing why, he found himself walking towards it, drawn by an inexplicable force. As he approached, he saw a young woman working in a small garden beside the house. She couldn't have been more than 20. Her long brown hair tied back in a loose ponytail as she knelt in the dirt, tending to the plants with care. For a moment, Daniel just watched her. There was something familiar about her movements, about the way she hummed softly to herself as she worked. It stirred something deep within him, a memory he couldn't quite grasp. The young woman must have sensed his presence because she suddenly looked up, her eyes meeting his. And in that instant, Daniel felt the world shift beneath his feet. Those eyes, he knew those eyes. They were the same warm, chocolate brown that had captivated him all those years ago. "Can I help you?" the young woman called out, wiping her hands on her worn jeans as she stood. Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. His heart was racing, his mind reeling with possibilities. It couldn't be, he told himself. It was impossible. But as he stood there, staring at this young woman who bore such a striking resemblance to the love he had lost, Daniel Harper felt something he hadn't experienced in 20 years: hope. Little did he know that this chance encounter was about to unravel everything he thought he knew about his past, his family and the woman he had never stopped loving. The truth, buried for 2 decades, was finally ready to come to light, and it would change all of their lives forever. Daniel's heart hammered in his chest as he stood rooted to the spot, unable to tear his gaze away from the young woman before him. She tilted her head, a quizzical expression crossing her face as she studied him. "Sir," she prompted, her voice tinged with a hint of concern. "Are you all right?" Shaking himself from his stupor, Daniel cleared his throat. "I'm sorry," he managed, his voice gruff. "I'm Daniel Harper. I was just taking a look around the area." The young woman's face lit up with recognition. "Oh, you must be here about the farm acquisitions. I'm Sophie Parker. My mom and I run this place." Sophie Parker. The name echoed in Daniel's mind, stirring a mix of emotions he couldn't quite decipher. "It's nice to meet you, Sophie," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Is your mother around? I'd like to speak with her if possible." Sophie nodded, gesturing towards the house. "She's inside. Come on, I'll introduce you." As they walked towards the farmhouse, Daniel's mind raced. It couldn't be a coincidence, could it? The resemblance was too strong, the feeling in his gut too insistent to ignore. But he'd been down this road before, chasing ghosts and false hopes. He steeled himself, trying to temper his expectations. The screen door creaked as Sophie pushed it open, calling out, "Mum, we have a visitor. It's Mr. Harper, about the farm." And then time seemed to stand still. She emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel, and Daniel felt the air leave his lungs. 20 years had passed, but he would know her anywhere. Elena Parker, once Elena Johnson, stood before him, looking as beautiful as the day she disappeared. Her hair, once a rich brown, was now streaked with silver. Lines had formed at the corners of her eyes and mouth, testament to the years that had passed. But it was her, undeniably, unquestionably her. Elena's eyes widened as they fell upon Daniel, a flicker of something, recognition, fear passing across her face before it was replaced by polite curiosity. "Hello," she said, her voice soft and hesitant. "I'm Elena Parker. How can I help you, Mr. Harper?" The room spun around Daniel. She didn't recognize him. How could she not recognize him? They had been in love, had planned a future together, and now she was looking at him like a stranger. "Elena," he breathed, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's me, Daniel." A frown creased Elena's brow, her eyes searching his face. "I'm sorry," she said slowly. "Do we know each other?" The pain that lanced through Daniel's heart was almost physical. He struggled to find words, to make sense of the situation. We were," he began, but Sophie cut in, her voice sharp with concern. "Mom, what's going on?" Elena shook her head, looking confused and a little frightened. "I don't know, sweetheart. Mr. Harper seems to think we've met before, but I don't remember." Daniel's mind raced. How was this possible? Had Elena truly forgotten him, forgotten their entire life together, or was there something more sinister at play? "Elena, please," he said, taking a step forward. "We were in love. We were going to be married. 20 years ago you disappeared. I've been searching for you ever since." The color drained from Elena's face. She stumbled back, gripping the edge of the kitchen counter for support. That's not possible," she whispered. "I've been here on this farm for as long as I can remember." Sophie moved to her mother's side, wrapping a protective arm around her shoulders. Her eyes, so like Elena's, bored into Daniel with a mixture of confusion and suspicion. "I think you should leave, Mr. Harper," she said firmly. But Daniel couldn't leave. Not now, not when he'd finally found her after all these years. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out his wallet. With trembling hands, he extracted a worn photograph, the last picture taken of him and Elena together before she vanished. "Look," he said, holding it out to them. "This is us, 20 years ago." Elena's eyes widened as she took in the image. There she was, young and radiant, her arms wrapped around a younger version of the man standing before her. The happiness in their faces was undeniable. I don't understand, Elena murmured, her voice shaking. That's me, but I don't remember any of this. Sophie peered at the photograph, her face a mask of shock. Mom, she whispered, what's going on? The tension in the room was palpable. Daniel's heart ached as he watched Elena struggle with the revelation, her world clearly upended by this unexpected encounter. He wanted nothing more than to take her in his arms, to tell her that everything would be all right, but he knew he couldn't. Not yet. I know this is a lot to take in, he said softly. I don't understand what's happened either, but Elena, I never stopped looking for you. I never stopped loving you. Elena's eyes met his, filled with a mixture of fear and something else, a glimmer of recognition, perhaps. I need some time, she said, her voice barely audible. It's too much. Sophie, still holding her mother protectively, nodded. I think you should go now, Mr. Harper. We need to process this. Daniel wanted to protest, to stay and unravel this mystery that had consumed 2 decades of his life, but he could see the toll this revelation was taking on Elena. The last thing he wanted was to cause her more pain. Of course, he said, his voice heavy with reluctance. But please, may I come back tomorrow? There's so much we need to talk about. Elena nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving his face. Tomorrow, she agreed softly. As Daniel turned to leave, his mind whirling with questions and emotions, he heard Sophie's voice behind him. Mr. Harper. Ed. He turned back, meeting her gaze. In that moment he saw not just Elena in her features, but something of himself as well. A suspicion began to form in his mind, one that would shake the very foundations of everything he thought he knew. Yes, Sophie? She hesitated for a moment before speaking. If what you're saying is true, if you and my mom were really together, does that mean, are you my father? The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Daniel felt the world tilt on its axis once more. As he looked at Sophie, at the familiar curve of her jaw, the set of her eyes he knew, deep in his bones he knew. I think, he said slowly, his voice thick with emotion, that's something we all need to figure out together. As he walked away from the farmhouse, leaving Elena and Sophie to grapple with the bombshell he'd dropped, Daniel knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The truth, buried for 20 years, was finally coming to light, and with it would come joy, pain, and revelations that would change all of their lives forever. The night air was thick with tension as Elena Parker sat on the porch of a farmhouse, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug of tea that had long since gone cold. The events of the day played over and over in her mind like a broken record, each repetition bringing more questions than answers. Daniel Harper. The name stirred something deep within her, a vague sense of familiarity that she couldn't quite grasp. His face, older now but still handsome, haunted her thoughts. And that photograph, the evidence of a life she couldn't remember living, it shook her to her very core. Mom? Sophie's soft voice broke through her reverie. Her daughter stepped out onto the porch, concern etched across her young face. Are you okay? Elena managed a weak smile. I'm not sure, sweetheart. I'm just trying to make sense of it all. Sophie sat down beside her, their shoulders touching in a gesture of silent support. For a moment they both stared out at the darkened fields, the weight of the day's revelations hanging heavy between them. Do you, Sophie hesitated, her voice small. Do you remember anything? About him? About before? Elena closed her eyes, searching the recesses of her mind for something. Anything that might confirm Daniel's story. But as always, there was nothing but a vast, empty space where her past should have been. I wish I did, she whispered, her voice cracking. But it's all just blank. Like my life began the day I woke up in that hospital 20 years ago. The memory of that day, the first clear memory she had, came flooding back. The sterile white walls, the beeping machines, the kind but pitying faces of the nurses. They had told her she'd been in an accident, that she was lucky to be alive. But when they asked her name, her history, she had nothing to give them. It was as if she had been born anew at the age of 25, with no past and no identity. The picture, Sophie pressed gently. That was you, with him. Elena nodded, her heart aching. It was. But Sophie, I don't know what it means. I don't know who I was back then, or why I disappeared, or how I ended up here. She turned to look at her daughter, seeing the conflicting emotions play across her face. Sophie had always been her rock, her reason for pushing forward when the uncertainty of her past threatened to overwhelm her. But now, she realized, Sophie was grappling with her own identity crisis. And the possibility that he might be. Elena couldn't bring herself to finish the sentence. My father, Sophie completed, her voice barely above a whisper. I know, it's a lot to take in. Elena reached out, taking Sophie's hand in hers. No matter what, you are my daughter. That's the one thing I'm certain of in all of this. And Sophie squeezed her hand, offering a small smile. I know, Mom, and we'll figure this out together. As they sat in companionable silence, Elena's mind drifted back to the moment Daniel had shown her the photograph. There had been a flash, just for an instant, of something more. A fragment of memory, perhaps the scent of coffee and old books, the sound of laughter, the feeling of strong arms around her. But it had disappeared as quickly as it had come, leaving her frustrated and more confused than ever. I keep thinking, Elena said softly, about the life I might have had, the person I might have been. It's strange to mourn for someone you don't even remember being. Sophie leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. Maybe this is a chance to find out, to fill in those blank spaces. Elena sighed, running a hand through her hair. Maybe, but what if I don't like what I find? What if the reason I disappeared, the reason I forgot everything, was because something terrible happened? The fear that had been lurking at the edges of her consciousness since Daniel's appearance suddenly came rushing to the forefront. What if she had run away for a reason? What if she had chosen to forget? We don't know that, Sophie said firmly. And whatever happened, whatever you find out, you're not alone. I'm here. And, well, it seems like Daniel has been looking for you all this time. That has to count for something, right? Right? Elena nodded slowly, trying to take comfort in her daughter's words. But there was still so much uncertainty, so many questions left unanswered. As the night wore on, Elena found herself standing in front of the mirror in her bedroom, studying her reflection. She traced the lines on her face, wondering about the experiences that had etched them there, experiences she couldn't remember. Her fingers moved to the small scar at her temple, hidden usually by her hair. The doctors had told her it was from the accident, but now she wondered if there was more to the story. Closing her eyes, Elena tried once more to recall something, anything from her past. But as always, there was nothing but darkness where her memories should have been. Who are you, Elena Parker? She whispered to her reflection. And what happened to Elena Johnson? As she climbed into bed that night, Elena knew that tomorrow would bring more questions, more revelations, and perhaps even more pain. But for the first time in 20 years, she also felt a glimmer of hope. Hope that finally she might find the answers she had been seeking for so long. And as sleep finally claimed her, Elena dreamed of a life she couldn't remember, of love she couldn't recall, and of a truth that was waiting to be uncovered. The early morning sun streamed through the curtains of Sophie Parker's bedroom, casting a warm glow across her face as she stirred from a restless sleep. For a moment, as consciousness slowly returned, she allowed herself to believe that yesterday had been nothing more than a strange dream. But reality crashed back in with startling clarity, and Sophie sat up, her mind already racing. At 20 years old, Sophie had always thought she knew who she was. The daughter of Elena Parker, raised on this small Texas farm, with a love for the land and a talent for coaxing life from the soil. She was the girl who'd graduated top of her class at the local high school, who'd chosen to stay and help her mother on the farm instead of heading off to college like many of her peers. Sophie was confident, grounded, sure of her place in the world. But now, everything she thought she knew about herself had been thrown into question. Slipping out of bed, Sophie padded over to her dresser, picking up the small framed photo that had always stood there. It was a picture of her and her mother, taken on Sophie's 5th birthday. Elena's arms were wrapped tightly around her daughter, both of their faces alight with laughter. Sophie had always treasured this photo, seeing in it the unbreakable bond between mother and daughter. But now, she couldn't help but search her own features for traces of the man who had appeared in their lives yesterday. Daniel Harper, the man who might be her father. Sophie had never known her father. Elena had always told her that he wasn't in the picture, that it had just been the two of them from the beginning. And Sophie had accepted that, never feeling the absence of a father figure because her mother had been more than enough. Elena had been Sophie's whole world for as long as she could remember. Strong, kind, and fiercely protective, Elena had worked tirelessly to provide for her daughter and to make their small farm thrive. She had taught Sophie everything she knew: how to nurture seedlings into strong plants, how to care for the animals, how to face life's challenges with grace and determination. But Elena had also carried a sadness with her, a deep-seated melancholy that Sophie had noticed even as a child. There were times when she'd catch her mother staring off into the distance, a faraway look in her eyes as if she were trying to recall something just out of reach. Sophie had always attributed it to the accident that had robbed Elena of her memories, but now she wondered if there was more to the story. Sighing, Sophie set the photo down and began to get dressed for the day. As she pulled on her worn jeans and a comfortable flannel shirt, she thought about the man who had turned their world upside down. Daniel Harper, a name that meant nothing to her yesterday but which now held the potential to change everything. Sophie had seen the way he looked at her mother, the raw emotion in his eyes when Elena didn't recognize him. And she'd seen something else too, a flash of recognition when he looked at Sophie herself, as if he were seeing a piece of himself reflected back at him. The possibility that Daniel might be her father stirred a complex mix of emotions within Sophie. On one hand, there was a part of her that had always wondered about her origins, about the other half of her genetic makeup. So, the idea of finally having answers was both thrilling and terrifying. But on the other hand, Sophie felt a fierce protectiveness towards her mother. Elena had been through so much, had built a life for them from nothing. The thought that this stranger could come in and upset the delicate balance of their world filled Sophie with a sense of dread. As she made her way downstairs, Sophie could hear her mother moving about in the kitchen. The familiar sounds and smells of breakfast being prepared brought a sense of normalcy to an otherwise surreal situation. "Morning, Mom," Sophie said, entering the kitchen and placing a gentle kiss on Elena's cheek. Elena turned, offering a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Good morning, sweetheart. Did you sleep okay?" Sophie shrugged, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "Not really. Too much on my mind, I guess." Elena nodded, understanding passing between them without words. For a moment, they stood in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. "He's coming back today, isn't he?" Sophie finally asked, her voice soft. Elena nodded, her hands tightening around her own coffee mug. "Yes, he is. Are you okay with that?" Sophie took a deep breath, considering her answer carefully. "I think we need answers, Mom. Both of us. And if Daniel Harper can provide those answers, then yes, I'm okay with it." Relief washed over Elena's face, and she reached out to squeeze her daughter's hand. "We'll face this together, Sophie. No matter what happens, no matter what we find out, it's you and me, always." Ice. Sophie squeezed back, feeling the strength of their bond. Whatever revelations the day might bring, whatever truths might be uncovered, she knew that this, the love between her and her mother, would remain constant. As they finished their breakfast and began their morning chores, both Elena and Sophie found themselves glancing frequently towards the road, waiting for the arrival of the man who held the key to their past. The day stretched out before them, full of possibility and fraught with uncertainty, as they prepared to uncover the truth that had been buried for 20 long years. As the Texas sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns of the Harper estate, Isabella Harper paced the length of her study. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped an anxious rhythm against the crystal tumbler in her hand, the amber liquid within sloshing with each agitated step. The call from Daniel had shaken her more than she cared to admit. Elena Parker, the name echoed in her mind, a ghost from the past she had thought long buried. But now, like a zombie clawing its way from the grave, the truth threatened to destroy everything she had built. Isabella's eyes darted to the ornate clock on the mantel. It was almost time. With a deep breath, she smoothed down her designer suit and made her way to her home office. As she settled behind the large mahogany desk, her computer chimed with an incoming video call. The face that appeared on the screen was familiar. James Harper, Daniel's son and Isabella's nephew. At 25, James was the spitting image of his father, with the same piercing blue eyes and strong jawline. But where Daniel's gaze held warmth, James was cold and calculating. "Aunt Isabella," James greeted, his voice clipped. "I assume you've heard from my father?" Isabella nodded, taking a sip of her drink to steady her nerves. "He's found her, James. After all these years, he's found Elena." A flicker of emotion passed across James' face, fear perhaps or anger. It was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "How is this possible? We were assured that she would never be found." "Clearly, our assurances were misplaced," Isabella snapped. "Your father is with her now, at some god-forsaken farm in the middle of nowhere." James leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowed in thought. "Does she remember? Does she know what happened?" Isabella shook her head. From what Daniel said, it seems she has no memory of her past, but that could change if she starts to remember. "And everything we've worked for could come crashing down," James finished, his voice hard. The weight of their shared secret hung heavy between them. 20 years ago, Isabella had made a choice that had altered the course of all their lives. She could still remember that night as if it were yesterday. The Harper Industries charity gala, the champagne flowing freely, the air thick with the scent of success and ambition. And there was Elena, radiant in a blue gown, her arm linked with Daniel's. Isabella had watched them from across the room, her heart burning with a mixture of jealousy and fear. Elena Johnson was a threat, not just to Isabella's relationship with her brother, but to the very future of Harper Industries. Daniel was besotted, talking of marriage, of stepping back from the company to start a family. Everything Isabella had worked for, all the carefully laid plans, were in jeopardy. So she had acted. A whispered conversation with a man whose services she had used before, a substantial transfer of funds, and a promise that Elena Johnson would disappear, never to be heard from again. It was supposed to be simple. Elena would be taken, given a new identity, a new life far away from Daniel and Harper Industries. But something had gone wrong. There had been an accident, a head injury that had robbed Elena of her memories. For years, Isabella had lived with the guilt, the fear of discovery. But as time passed, as Daniel's grief turned to resignation, she had allowed herself to believe that the secret would remain buried forever. Now, it all threatened to unravel. What do we do? James' voice pulled Isabella from her memories. She took a deep breath, her mind racing. We need to contain this. If Elena remembers, if she tells Daniel the truth, he'll never forgive us, James finished. And the company? The company will be finished, Isabella said grimly. Everything we've built, everything we've sacrificed for, it will all be for nothing. James leaned forward, his eyes glinting with a determination that sent a chill down Isabella's spine. Then we can't let that happen. Whatever it takes, we need to keep Elena quiet. Isabella nodded slowly, the weight of what they were considering settling over her. It won't be easy. Daniel won't let her out of his sight now that he's found her. Leave that to me, James said, a cold smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I'll fly down there, play the part of the concerned nephew. I can keep an eye on things, maybe even get close to Elena and her daughter. Isabella's eyebrows shot up. Daughter? James nodded. Sophie Parker, 20 years old, born shortly after Elena disappeared. The implications hung in the air between them. If Sophie was Daniel's daughter. And this complicates things, Isabella murmured. Or simplifies them, James countered. A long-lost daughter might be just the distraction we need. Keep Daniel focused on playing happy families while we handle the situation. Isabella studied her nephew's face, seeing in it a reflection of her own ambition, her own willingness to do whatever it took to protect what was theirs. She had molded James in a him image, grooming him to be the heir to Harper Industries that Daniel had never wanted to be. And now it seemed that grooming would be put to the ultimate test. Be careful, James, she warned. Daniel may be blinded by emotion right now, but he's not a fool. And if Elena starts to remember... She won't, James said firmly. I'll make sure of it. As the call ended, Isabella sat back in her chair, her mind whirling with possibilities and contingencies. She had buried this secret for 20 years, had built an empire on its foundation. She wasn't about to let it all come crashing down now. Standing, she moved to the window, looking out over the vast Harper estate. In the distance, she could see the towering skyscrapers of the city, the Harper Industries logo gleaming in the sunlight. It was a reminder of everything she had to lose and everything she would fight to protect. As she raised her glass to her lips, Isabella made a silent vow. No matter what it took, no matter who she had to hurt, she would keep her secret buried. The truth about Elena Parker's disappearance would never come to light. Not if Isabella Harper had anything to say about it. Little did she know that fate had other plans, and the web of lies she had so carefully woven was about to unravel in ways she could never have imagined. The steady hum of the private jet's engines provided a soothing backdrop as James Harper stared out the window, watching the Texas landscape unfold beneath him. His reflection in the glass stared back at him, a young man with his uncle's chiseled features and his aunt's piercing eyes. But behind that carefully cultivated exterior, a storm was brewing. James had always prided himself on his ability to compartmentalize, to push aside emotions and focus on the task at hand. It was a skill that had served him well in the cutthroat world of corporate finance, allowing him to climb the ranks of Harper Industries with ruthless efficiency. But now, as he flew towards a confrontation that could change everything, he found his usually impenetrable walls beginning to crack. The weight of the secret he carried seemed to press down on him, making the luxurious cabin feel claustrophobic. For 20 years he had lived with the knowledge of what his Aunt Isabella had done, of the lie that had shaped not just his family, but his entire life. He had been just a child when Elena disappeared, too young to fully understand the implications. But as he grew older, as he was drawn deeper into the web of deceit, the burden of that knowledge had grown heavier. James closed his eyes, memories flooding back unbidden. He remembered the day his father had told him about Elena, about the woman he had loved and lost. The pain in Daniel's eyes had been raw, unbearable, and James, young as he was, had felt a fierce protectiveness towards his father, a desire to shield him from further hurt. It was that desire, perhaps, that had made it so easy for Isabella to mold him, to shape him into her ideal heir. She had whispered in his ear, filling his head with dreams of power and success. "Your father is too soft," she would say, "too easily swayed by emotion. But you, James, you have what it takes to lead Harper Industries into the future." And James had believed her. He had thrown himself into his studies, into learning every aspect of the business. He had hardened his heart, pushed aside any qualms about the methods they used to stay on top, all in service of the lie of protecting his father from a truth that would destroy him. But now, as the jet began its descent into the small Texas airport, James felt the certainty that had guided him for so long begin to waver. The thought of facing Elena, of looking into the eyes of the woman whose life they had stolen, filled him with a dread he couldn't quite shake. And then there was Sophie. The idea that he might have a cousin, a flesh and blood connection to the aunt he had not known, stirred something in James that he had long thought dormant. The longing for family, for connection that went beyond boardrooms and balance sheets. As the jet touched down, James straightened his tie and schooled his features into a mask of calm determination. He had a role to play, a mission to accomplish. But the doubts lingered, whispering in the back of his mind. Was he really protecting his father, as he had always told himself? Or was he simply protecting the lie that had become the foundation of their lives? The car ride from the airport to the farm was a blur of dusty roads and open fields. James used the time to gather his thoughts, to shore up his resolve. He reminded himself of what was at stake, not just the company, but the very fabric of their family. If the truth came out, it would destroy everything. But as the car pulled up to the modest farmhouse, as James caught his first glimpse of Elena Parker standing on the porch, all his carefully laid plans seemed to crumble. She looked so much like the photos he had seen, like the woman his father had described with such love and longing, and beside her stood Sophie, a young woman who could have been James' sister. So striking was the family resemblance. For a moment James sat frozen in the car, his hand on the door handle. He could turn back now, he realized. He could call Isabella, tell her he couldn't go through with it. They could find another way. But then he saw his father emerge from the house, saw the look of hope and happiness on Daniel's face as he gazed at Elena, and James knew that he had no choice. He had to see this through, had to protect his father from the devastating truth. With a deep breath, James stepped out of the car, plastering a warm smile on his face. "Uncle Daniel," he called out, striding forward with an outstretched hand. "Surprise, I heard you were down here and thought I'd join you." As Daniel turned towards him, as Elena and Sophie looked on with curiosity, James felt the weight of his deception settle over him like a shroud. He was committed now, for better or worse. The game was on, and the stakes had never been higher. Little did James know that his arrival would set in motion a chain of events that would test not just his loyalty, but the very core of who he believed himself to be. The tension in the Harper family's grand living room was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Elena Parker stood near the fireplace, her posture rigid, eyes darting nervously around the opulent space that seemed to mock her simple farm life. Across from her, Isabella Harper perched on an antique settee, her perfectly manicured nails tapping an impatient rhythm on the armrest. Daniel Harper stood between them, a physical barrier in what had become an emotional minefield. His eyes kept flicking between the two women, the love of his life he had thought lost forever, and the sister he was beginning to see in a terrifying new light. "I think it's time we cleared the air," Daniel said, breaking the heavy silence. "Isabella, Elena deserves to know the truth. We all do." Isabella's lips curled into a thin smile, but her eyes remained cold. "And what truth would that be, dear brother? That your long-lost love has miraculously returned from the dead? How convenient." Elena flinched at the venom in Isabella's voice, but stood her ground. "I don't know what happened to me," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "But I know that I didn't just disappear of my own accord. Someone took that choice from me." Isabella's eyes narrowed. "Are you accusing me of something, Ms. Parker?" "I'd be careful if I were you. Slander is a serious offense." "Stop it, Isabella," Daniel snapped. "We're not in a courtroom. We're family. Or at least we're supposed to be." The word family hung in the air, loaded with unspoken accusations and long-buried resentments. Elena took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she knew would be a difficult conversation. "I've been having flashes," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Memories, I think. They're not clear, but they're there, and they all point to one thing, that my disappearance wasn't an accident." Isabella's composure slipped for just a moment, a flicker of fear crossing her face before the mask of indifference slammed back into place. "Memories can be unreliable," she said dismissively, "especially after a traumatic event. You can't possibly expect us to believe." "I remember you, Isabella," Elena interrupted, her voice gaining strength. "I remember you at a party. You were watching Daniel and me. You looked angry, jealous even." Daniel's head snapped towards his sister, his eyes widening in dawning realization. "Isabella," he breathed, "what did you do?" For a long moment, Isabella said nothing. The only sound in the room was the ticking of an antique clock, marking the seconds as the truth hung in the balance. Then, with a deep sigh, Isabella's shoulders sagged, as if a great weight had finally become too much to bear. "You were ruining everything," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "All our plans, all our hard work, you were going to throw it all away for love." She spat the last word like it was poison. Elena gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Daniel took a step back, shock and betrayal written across his face. You were behind Elena's disappearance, all this time." Isabella stood abruptly, pacing the room like a caged animal. "You don't understand. None of you do. Harper Industries was on the brink of greatness. We were about to make deals that would have cemented our place at the top. But you," she whirled to face Elena, her eyes blazing, "you were pulling Daniel away. He was talking about stepping back, about starting a family. I couldn't let that happen. So you had me kidnapped." Elena's voice was hollow with disbelief. "You stole 20 years of my life because of business deals." "It wasn't supposed to happen like that," Isabella said, a note of desperation creeping into her voice. "You were just supposed to be taken away, given a new life somewhere far from here. But then there was an accident. You hit your head, lost your memory. By the time I found out, it was too late. The damage was done." Daniel's fists clenched at his sides, his whole body trembling with rage. "You let me believe she was dead," he said, his voice dangerously low. "You watched me grieve, watched me search for years, and you knew. You knew all along." Isabella turned to her brother, her eyes pleading. "I did it for you, Daniel. For us, for the company. Everything I've ever done has been to protect our family's legacy." "Legacy?" Daniel laughed bitterly. "What legacy, Isabella? A legacy of lies and manipulation, of destroying lives for the sake of profit. That's not a legacy. That's a curse." Elena, who had been silent as the siblings argued, suddenly stepped forward. Her eyes, which had been clouded with confusion and hurt, now burned with a fierce determination. "So I want to know everything," she said, her voice steady. "Every detail, every decision. I've lived half my life not knowing who I am. I won't live another day in the dark." Isabella seemed to deflate under Elena's gaze. For the first time, she looked her age, tired, worn, the weight of her secrets etched into the lines of her face. "It's a long story," she said softly, "and not a pretty one." "We have time," Elena replied, her tone brooking no argument. And so, as the afternoon sun began to dip towards the horizon, Isabella Harper began to talk. She spoke of ambition and fear, of a young woman so desperate to prove herself in a man's world that she would stop at nothing to succeed. She told of backroom deals and whispered threats of money changing hands in the dead of night. As the tale unfolded, Elena felt a strange mix of emotions wash over her. Anger, certainly a white-hot rage at the years stolen from her, but also pity for the scared, insecure woman Isabella must have been to go to such lengths, and underneath it all, a sense of relief. Finally, after 20 years, the puzzle pieces of her life were falling into place. Daniel listened in stunned silence, his worldview shifting with every word his sister spoke. The woman he had trusted, had relied on for 2 decades, now revealed as the architect of his greatest pain. It was almost too much to bear. As Isabella's story drew to a close, a heavy silence fell over the room. The truth, so long buried, now lay exposed, raw and ugly in the fading light. Elena looked at Daniel, saw the conflict raging behind his eyes, and knew that nothing would ever be the same again. "What happens now?" she asked softly, the question directed at both Harper siblings. Daniel straightened, his jaw set in a hard line. "Now," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "we start to make this right, all of us." As the three of them stood there, the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future pressing down upon them, they knew that this was only the beginning. The road ahead would be long and difficult, filled with more revelations, more pain, and perhaps, eventually, healing. But for now, in this moment, the truth had finally been spoken, and that, at least, was a start. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Harper estate's manicured lawn as Danielle, Elena, and Sophie sat on the veranda, the weight of recent revelations hanging heavy in the air. The truth about Elena's disappearance had been a shock to them all. But there was still one more secret to uncover, one that had the potential to change their lives forever. Daniel cleared his throat, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. "Sophie," he began, his voice gentle but strained, There's something we need to discuss. Something about your parentage." Sophie's eyes darted between Daniel and her mother, a mix of curiosity and apprehension on her face. "What do you mean?" Mean. Elena reached out, taking her daughter's hand. "Sweetheart, when I disappeared, when I lost my memory, I was pregnant. I didn't know it at the time, but—" "What are you saying?" Sophie's voice trailed off, her eyes widening as the implication sank in. Daniel nodded slowly, his blue eyes, so similar to Sophie's own, filled with a tumult of emotions. "I believe I'm your father, Sophie." The words hung in the air, heavy with 20 years of lost time and missed opportunities. Sophie sat frozen, her mind reeling as she tried to process this new information. "But how can you be sure?" she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel reached into his pocket, pulling out a folded piece of paper. "I had a DNA test done," he explained, his voice thick with emotion. "I hope you don't mind, I had to know." Sophie took the paper with trembling hands, her eyes scanning the results. The clinical language blurred before her eyes, but one phrase stood out starkly: 99.99% probability of paternity. "Oh my God," she breathed, looking up at Daniel, at her father with new eyes. Suddenly, all the little things she had noticed about him, the familiar gestures and expressions, took on a new significance. Elena squeezed her daughter's hand. "I'm so sorry, Sophie. If I had known, if I had remembered." "It's not your fault, Mom," Sophie said quickly, turning to embrace her mother. "None of this is your fault." As mother and daughter held each other, Daniel watched with a mixture of joy and heartache. He had a daughter, a beautiful, intelligent, kind young woman, but he had missed so much of her life, so many milestones and memories that he could never get back. "Sophie," he said softly, "I want you to know that I would have been there. If I had known about you, nothing could have kept me away. I'm so sorry that I wasn't there for you growing up." Sophie pulled back from her mother, turning to face Daniel. Her eyes, so like his own, were brimming with unshed tears. "It's not your fault either," she said. "You didn't know. We were all victims in this." A moment of silence fell over them, each lost in their own thoughts. It was Sophie who finally broke it, a small, tentative smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "So I guess this makes me Sophie Harper, huh?" Daniel's heart swelled at her words, a smile breaking across his face. "Only if you want it to be," he said. "I know this is a lot to take in. I don't expect you to suddenly see me as your father. We have a lot of lost time to make up for, and I'd like the chance to get to know you, if you'll let me." Sophie nodded slowly, her smile growing a little wider. "I'd like that, Tad." The word hung in the air between them, new and strange and wonderful all at once. Daniel felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. Overwhelmed by the surge of love he felt for this young woman, who was his flesh and blood. Elena watched the exchange with mixed emotions. Joy for the connection her daughter was forming with her father, sadness for the years they had all lost, and a lingering fear of what this might mean for their future. "What happens now?" she asked softly, voicing the question that was on all their minds. Daniel took a deep breath, looking between Elena and Sophie. "That's up to us," he said, "all of us. I know this is a lot to process, and we all have a lot of healing to do, but I want you both to know that I'm here. Whatever you need, whatever you want, I'm not going anywhere." Sophie nodded, a determined look settling over her features. "We're family," she said firmly. "All of us. And family sticks together, right?" "Right," Elena and Daniel said in unison, sharing a look that spoke volumes about their shared past and the possibility of a shared future. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the three of them, there was a sense of a new beginning. The road ahead would not be easy. There were still wounds to heal, truths to face, and relationships to rebuild. But in this moment, as father, mother, and daughter sat together, there was also hope. They were a family, bound not just by blood, but by a shared experience of loss and rediscovery, and together they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, stronger for having found each other again. As Sophie leaned into her mother's embrace, reaching out to take Daniel's hand, she felt a sense of completeness she had never known before. She had always known who she was, Sophie Parker, daughter of Elena. But now she was also Sophie Harper, and a whole new world of possibilities stretched out before her. The truth, long buried, had finally come to light, and with it came the promise of a future none of them could have imagined just days before. The soft glow of lamplight filled Elena's bedroom at the farmhouse, casting warm shadows across the walls. She sat on the edge of her bed, a small wooden box clutched tightly in her hands. Daniel stood by the window, his posture tense, watching her with a mix of concern and anticipation. "There's something else you need to know," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something I've never told anyone, not even Sophie." Daniel moved closer, sitting beside her on the bed. "Whatever it is, Elena, you can tell me. We're in this together now." "Ismarimini Artwegs, Edmel. Iwat Gute." Elena nodded, taking a deep breath. With trembling hands, she opened the box, revealing a small, worn baby booty and a faded hospital bracelet. Before Sophie, she began, her voice thick with emotion. There was another baby. Daniel's breath caught in his throat, his eyes fixed on the tiny booty. "What do you mean?" When I disappeared," Elena continued, fighting back tears, "I was pregnant. But it wasn't just Sophie I was carrying. There were twins." The revelation hung heavy in the air between them. Daniel reached out, gently taking Elena's hand in his. "Twins," he repeated, his voice a mixture of awe and heartbreak. Elena nodded, a single tear escaping and rolling down her cheek. "I didn't remember at first. After the accident, when I woke up in the hospital with no memory, I was still pregnant, but there was only one heartbeat. They told me I had lost one of the babies in the trauma." Daniel closed his eyes, the pain of what could have been washing over him. A child he had never known, never had the chance to love. "Oh, Elena," he breathed, pulling her close. She leaned into his embrace, drawing strength from his presence. "I named him," she whispered. "The baby we lost. I called him Michael. I don't know why, but it felt right." "Michael," Daniel repeated softly, the name of his unknown son feeling both foreign and achingly familiar on his tongue. Elena pulled back slightly, looking into Daniel's eyes. "I've carried this secret for so long," she said. "The joy of Sophie's birth was always tinged with the sorrow of losing Michael. And not remembering you, not knowing the father of my children, it was like a piece of me was always missing." Daniel cupped her face gently, wiping away her tears with his thumb. "You're not alone anymore, Elena. We can grieve for Michael together, honor his memory." She nodded, a small, sad smile touching her lips. "I've always felt his presence in a way, especially on Sophie's birthday. It was like a shadow, a reminder of what we lost." "Does Sophie know?" Daniel asked gently. Elena shook her head. "I could never find the right words to tell her. How do you explain to your child that they once had a twin? That there's a part of them missing that they never even knew about?" Daniel sighed, understanding the weight of the secret Elena had carried for so long. "We'll tell her together," he said firmly. "When the time is right. She deserves to know about her brother." Elena nodded, her fingers tracing the soft fabric of the booty. "I've imagined him so many times," she confessed. "In what he would have looked like, what kind of person he would have become. Would he have had your eyes like Sophie does?" Daniel swallowed hard, his own eyes filling with tears. "I'm sure he would have been beautiful," he said softly, "just like his mother and sister." For a long moment, they sat in silence, both lost in thoughts of what might have been. The room seemed to fill with the presence of their lost child, a bittersweet reminder of the family they could have been. Finally, Elena spoke again, her voice stronger now. "I want to do something," she said, "to remember him properly. We never had a chance to mourn, to say goodbye." Daniel nodded, squeezing her hand. "Whatever you want to do, I'm here. We could plant a tree for him or set up a scholarship in his name, something to ensure that Michael's memory lives on." Elena's eyes lit up at the suggestion. "A scholarship," she repeated, "for children who've lost a parent or sibling. Something good coming out of our loss." "It's perfect," Daniel agreed, a sense of purpose filling him. "We'll make sure Michael's short life has meaning, that he's not forgotten." As they sat there, Planning a tribute to the son they had never known, both Elaine and Daniel felt a shift. The pain of their loss would never fully fade, but sharing it, acknowledging it together, brought a sense of healing they had never expected. In that quiet bedroom, surrounded by memories of what was and what could have been, they found a new connection. Their shared grief became a bridge, linking their past to their present and offering hope for their future. As the night deepened around them, Elena and Daniel held each other close, united in their love for the daughter they had and the son they had lost. And in that moment, despite the pain and the years of separation, they knew that they were exactly where they were meant to be, together, facing whatever life had in store for them as a family. The boardroom of Harper Industries towered above the bustling city, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the skyline. But Daniel Harper's attention was fixed firmly on the faces around the long mahogany table, each one a mask of tension and anticipation. At the far end sat Marcus Blackwood, Daniel's longtime business rival, and now the leader of a faction seeking to wrest control of the company. His salt and pepper hair was immaculately styled, his designer suit a sharp contrast to Daniel's more casual attire. "Gentlemen, ladies," Marcus began, his voice smooth as silk, "I think we all know why we're here. Harper Industries is at a crossroads, and it's time for a change in leadership." Daniel leaned forward, his jaw set. "A change in leadership, or a hostile takeover, Marcus? Let's call it what it is." Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Always so dramatic, Daniel. I prefer to think of it as a necessary evolution. Your recent, personal issues have raised concerns among the board and our shareholders." Daniel felt a surge of anger at the thinly veiled reference to Elena and Sophie. He had known that his unexpected family reunion would cause ripples in the business world, but he hadn't anticipated such a swift and calculated move against him. "My personal life has no bearing on my ability to run this company," Daniel said firmly. "Harper Industries has never been stronger. Our last quarter showed record profits, and our new sustainable energy initiative is set to revolutionize the industry." And yet, Marcus countered, there are rumors of instability at the top, whispers of family secrets and long-lost heirs. "It's not a good look, Daniel. The market doesn't like uncertainty." From the corner of his eye, Daniel saw James shift uncomfortably in his seat. His nephew had been uncharacteristically quiet since the meeting began, and Daniel couldn't help but wonder where James' loyalties truly lay. "If we're going to talk about uncertainty," Daniel said, his voice level, "let's discuss your proposed strategies, Marcus. Cutting our R&D budget by 30%, laying off a quarter of our workforce. These aren't plans for growth. They're short-sighted attempts to boost short-term profits at the expense of our future." A murmur ran through the room. Daniel pressed his advantage. "Harper Industries has always been about innovation, about looking to the future. My father built this company on the principle that we could do well by doing good. Are we really prepared to abandon that legacy for a quick profit?" Marcus's smile faltered for a moment before he regained his composure. "Noble sentiments, Daniel. That sentiment doesn't pay the bills. The market is changing and we need to adapt or die. Your family values approach might have worked in the past, but we're living in a cutthroat world now. And that's exactly why we need to stick to our principles more than ever," Daniel countered, rising to his feet, and he looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each board member in turn. "We have an opportunity here, not just to make money, but to make a difference. Our sustainable energy projects could transform communities, create jobs, and help combat climate change. Is that really something we're willing to sacrifice for a short-term boost to our stock price?" The room fell silent as Daniel's words sank in. Even Marcus seemed momentarily at a loss for words. It was James who finally broke the silence, clearing his throat nervously. "Uncle Daniel is right," he said, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. "I've been looking over the numbers, and our long-term projections with the current strategy far outweigh any short-term gains we might see from Mr. Blackwood's proposals." Daniel felt a surge of pride and gratitude towards his nephew. Maybe there was hope for James after all. Marcus, however, was not ready to concede defeat. "This is all very touching," he said, a hint of sarcasm in his tone. "But the fact remains, Daniel, that your position here is precarious. Your sister's indiscretions have cast a shadow over this entire company. Can you really expect to maintain control when your own family is imploding?" Daniel stiffened, anger flashing in his eyes. "My sister's actions were her own," he said firmly. "They have nothing to do with the running of this company. And if you think you can use my family against me, Marcus, you're sorely mistaken. Because family, real family, is what gives us strength. It's what reminds us of what's truly important." He paused, looking around the room once more. "I founded this company with a vision of a better future, not just for our shareholders, but for everyone. That vision hasn't changed. If anything, recent events have only strengthened my resolve. We have a chance to build something lasting here, something that our children and grandchildren can be proud of. I'm asking you all to believe in that vision, to believe in Harper Industries." The silence that followed was electric. Daniel could see the uncertainty on the faces of the board members, could almost hear the wheels turning in their minds as they weighed their options. Finally, Evelyn Chen, one of the longest-serving board members, spoke up. "I think," she said slowly, "that we need to put this to a vote. All those in favor of maintaining the current leadership and strategy say aye." Daniel held his breath as hands began to raise around the table. One by one, the board members made their choice. When the final tally was counted, Daniel allowed himself a small smile of relief. He had won, if only by a narrow margin. Marcus stood abruptly, his face a mask of barely contained fury. "This isn't over, Daniel," he hissed as he gathered his papers. "You may have won this round, but mark my words, I'll be back." As Marcus stormed out of the room, followed by his supporters, Daniel sank back into his chair, the adrenaline of the confrontation slowly ebbing away. He had held on to control of the company, but at what cost? And how long could he maintain his position with vultures like Marcus circling? James approached, a tentative smile on his face. "That was impressive, Uncle Daniel. I'm glad I could help." Daniel nodded, studying his nephew's face. "Thank you, James. Your support means a lot. But I have to ask, where do you stand in all of this? Really?" James hesitated, conflict clear in his eyes. I'm not sure," he admitted. "But I know that what you said about family, about building something lasting, that resonated with me. I want to be part of that." Daniel stood, placing a hand on James' shoulder. "Then let's build it together," he said, "as a family." As they left the boardroom, Daniel knew that this was just the beginning. The battle for Harper Industries and for the very soul of his family was far from over. But for now, at least, they had won a crucial victory. And with Elena and Sophie waiting for him at home, Daniel felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Warm Texas sun beat down on Elena and Sophie as they stood at the edge of their farm, looking out over the vast expanse of land that had been their home for so long. But today, the familiar vista was marred by the sight of heavy machinery in the distance, the rumble of engines carrying on the wind. "I can't believe they're really going through with this," Sophie said, her voice tight with anger and disbelief. Elena nodded grimly, her hands clenched at her sides. "Harper Industries' new fracking operation. Right on our doorstep." The irony of the situation wasn't lost on either of them. The very company founded by Daniel, the man who was Sophie's father and Elena's long-lost love, was now threatening their way of life and the delicate ecosystem they had worked so hard to protect. "We have to do something, Mom," Sophie said, turning to face her mother with determination burning in her eyes. "We can't just let them destroy everything." Elena sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I know, sweetheart. But this isn't going to be an easy fight. Harper Industries has deep pockets and a lot of influence." "But we have the truth on our side," Sophie countered. "And we have Dad. Surely he can do something about this." The mention of Daniel brought a conflicted look to Elena's face. Their reunion had been filled with joy and hope, but this new development had thrown a wrench into their fragile reconnection. "It's complicated," she said softly. Daniel may be the CEO, but he doesn't make every decision. And from what he's told me, there are factions within the company pushing hard for this project. Sophie's jaw set in a determined line that reminded Elena so much of Daniel. Then we'll just have to push harder, she said firmly. Over the next few weeks, Elena and Sophie threw themselves into their fight against the fracking operation. They organized community meetings, reached out to environmental groups, and started a social media campaign to raise awareness about the potential dangers of fracking in their area. Their little farmhouse became a hub of activity, with volunteers coming and going at all hours, phones ringing constantly, and the dining table perpetually covered in maps, petitions, and environmental impact reports. One evening, as they sat surrounded by the organized chaos of their campaign, Daniel arrived unexpectedly. The tension in the room was palpable as he entered, his eyes taking in the scene before him. "I see you've been busy," he said, his voice carefully neutral. Elena stood, wiping her hands on her jeans. "Daniel, we weren't expecting you." "Clearly," he replied, a hint of hurt in his tone. "I had to hear about all this from James. Were you planning on telling me about your crusade against my company?" Sophie jumped to her feet, her eyes flashing. "Your company is threatening our home, Dad. Did you expect us to just sit back and let it happen?" Daniel held up his hands in a placating gesture. "Of course not. But I hoped you would come to me first. We're family. We should be able to talk about these things." Elena stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Sophie's arm. "You're right, Daniel. We should have talked to you. But this is bigger than just us. It's about the community, the environment. We couldn't just stay silent." Daniel's shoulders sagged slightly. "I understand. But you have to know I'm in a difficult position here. The board is pushing hard for this project. They see it as essential for the company's growth." "And what do you see it as?" Sophie challenged, her voice softening slightly. Daniel was quiet for a moment, his eyes moving from the determined face of his daughter to the worried expression of the one he loved. Finally, he spoke. "I see it as a mistake," he admitted. "But changing course now, it won't be easy." A glimmer of hope sparked in Elena's chest. "But not impossible," she pressed gently. Daniel shook his head. "No, not impossible. But it will take time and careful maneuvering. The faction supporting this project is powerful, and they won't give up without a fight." Sophie's face lit up with a fierce grin. "Well then, it's a good thing you've got us on your side. We're pretty good at fighting." Despite the seriousness of the situation, Daniel couldn't help but chuckle. "I'm starting to see that," he said, a note of pride in his voice. As the evening wore on, the three of them pored over documents and strategies, Daniel offering insights into the corporate workings of Harper Industries, while Elena and Sophie shared the concerns of the local community. It wasn't an easy conversation, with tensions flaring at times, but by the end of the night, they had the beginnings of a plan. "It won't be quick," Daniel warned as he prepared to leave. "And it won't be easy, but I promise you we'll find a way to make this right." Elena walked him to the door, a mix of emotions swirling in her chest. As he turned to go, she caught his hand. "Thank you," she said softly, "for listening, for understanding." Daniel squeezed her hand gently. "We're in this together now," he replied. "All of us." As Elena watched him drive away, she felt a renewed sense of hope. The fight ahead would be tough, but with Daniel on their side, and the strength of their newfound family bond, she believed they had a real chance of success. Inside, Sophie was already back at work, her energy seemingly boundless. "Come on, Mom," she called. "We've got a planet to save." Elena smiled, turning back to the house. Yes, the battle was far from over. But for the first time since this all began, she felt truly optimistic about the outcome. Together, they would find a way to protect their home, their community, and the future they all shared. The sleek, modern offices of Thornton Associates, one of the city's most prestigious law firms, felt a world away from the warm, homey atmosphere of Elena's farmhouse. Daniel sat rigidly in a plush leather chair, his fingers drumming an anxious rhythm on the armrest. Across from him, Sarah Thornton, a sharp-eyed attorney with a reputation for handling high-profile cases, studied him intently. "Mr. Harper," Sarah began, her tone businesslike, I understand this is a delicate situation, but I need you to be completely honest with me. What exactly do you know about your sister's involvement in Elena Parker's disappearance? Daniel took a deep breath, the weight of the past few weeks' revelations pressing down on him. Isabella admitted to arranging for Elena to be taken away, he said, his voice strained. She claims it was never meant to result in Elena losing her memory, but the fact remains that she orchestrated the whole thing. Sarah nodded, making a note on her legal pad. And you're certain about this? There's no chance Isabella could have been mistaken or exaggerating. No, Daniel said firmly. She was very clear about her role. She saw Elena as a threat to the company, to our family's legacy. She thought she was protecting our interests. The attorney's eyebrows rose slightly. I see. Mr. Harper, you understand that what you're describing is a serious crime, kidnapping, at the very least, possibly conspiracy and fraud as well. Daniel nodded, a lump forming in his throat. I know. Believe me, I've been grappling with this since I found out. Isabella is my sister, but what she did, it's unforgivable. Sarah leaned back in her chair, her expression grave. The statute of limitations on kidnapping is complex, especially given the unusual circumstances of this case. However, given the high-profile nature of your family and your company, this is likely to attract significant attention if it goes public. What are our options? Daniel asked, dreading the answer. Well, Sarah began, we could attempt to handle this quietly. Negotiate a settlement with Miss Parker, perhaps, in exchange for her silence. However, given the severity of the crime and the length of time involved, that might not be sufficient. Daniel shook his head. No, I don't want to sweep this under the rug. Elena deserves justice, and Sophie, my daughter, she deserves to know the truth about what happened to her mother. Sarah nodded, a hint of approval in her eyes. In that case, we need to be proactive. I recommend we reach out to the district attorney's office ourselves, present what we know, and cooperate fully with any investigation. It might help mitigate some of the potential damage to your company and your personal reputation. As they discussed the legal ramifications and potential strategies, Daniel felt a mix of emotions churning inside him. Relief at finally bringing the truth to light, warred with guilt over his sister's actions and fear for the future of his family and his company. There's one more thing, Daniel said as their meeting drew to a close. My nephew, James, I have reason to believe he might have known about this, at least in part. I'm not sure how involved he was, but... Sarah's expression turned grim. That complicates things. If James was aware of or involved in covering up a crime, he could face charges as well. We'll need to tread carefully there. As Daniel left the law office, his mind was reeling. The path ahead was fraught with legal and personal pitfalls, but he knew there was no turning back now. The truth had to come out, no matter the cost. He pulled out his phone, dialing Elena's number. When she answered, he could hear the concern in her voice. Daniel, how did it go? It's complicated, he sighed, but we're moving forward. The lawyer thinks we should go to the DA ourselves, get ahead of this before it explodes in the media. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Are you sure about this? Elena asked softly. It's your sister, Daniel, your family. You and Sophie are my family too, Daniel replied, his voice firm. And you deserve justice. We can't build a future together with this hanging over us. Elena's voice was thick with emotion when she spoke again. Thank you. I know this isn't easy for you. No, it's not, Daniel admitted. But it's the right thing to do. Can I come over later? I think we should talk to Sophie together about what's going to happen next. Of course, Elena said. We'll be here. We'll be here. As Daniel hung up, he felt a strange mix of dread and determination. The road ahead would be difficult, fraught with legal battles, media scrutiny, and family strife. But for the first time in years, he felt like he was truly doing the right thing. The truth about Elena's disappearance was finally coming to light, and with it, the chance for healing, justice, and a new beginning for all of them. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Daniel was ready to face them, not alone, but with the strength of the family he had rediscovered by his side. The old barn on the outskirts of the Harper estate creaked and groaned in the wind, its weathered boards a stark contrast to the manicured lawns and modern architecture of the main house. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the musty scent of ages past. Isabella Harper paced the length of the barn, her designer heels clicking against the worn wooden floor, a stark reminder of how far she had fallen from her once lofty position. Her carefully coiffed hair was disheveled, dark circles under her eyes betraying sleepless nights filled with worry and regret. The weight of her actions, the lies she had maintained for 2 decades, pressed down on her like a physical force. This wasn't supposed to happen, she muttered to herself, her voice echoing in the empty space. It wasn't supposed to go this far. The sound of approaching footsteps made her freeze. The barn door creaked open, and James stepped inside, his face a mask of concern and confusion. "Aunt Isabella," he called out, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. "What's going on? Why did you ask me to meet you here?" Isabella turned to face her nephew, seeing in him a reflection of the ambition and ruthlessness she had cultivated for so long. "James," she said, her voice strained, "we have a problem. A big one." As she filled him in on the latest developments, Daniel's meeting with the lawyer, the looming threat of a criminal investigation, she could see the color draining from James' face. Reason. "This can't be happening," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "If this gets out, we'll lose everything. The company, our reputation, everything we've worked for." Isabella nodded grimly. "I know. That's why we need to act now, before it's too late." James' eyes narrowed. "What are you suggesting?" Before Isabella could respond, the barn door burst open again. Elena and Sophie stood in the doorway, their expressions a mix of shock and anger. "Isabella?" Elena gasped. "What are you doing here?" Sophie's eyes darted between Isabella and James, her fists clenching at her sides. "We followed you," she said to James, her voice tight with betrayal. "We knew something was going on, but this..." The tension in the barn was palpable as the 4 of them faced each other, years of secrets and lies hanging heavy in the air between them. Isabella was the first to break the silence. "Elena," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I know you must hate me for what I've done." "You?" Elena interrupted, her voice rising. "You stole 20 years of my life. You took me away from Daniel, from the life we were supposed to have together. And for what? Your precious company." James stepped forward, his face hardening. "You don't understand. Harper Industries is everything. It's our legacy, our future. We did what we had to do to protect it." Sophie's eyes flashed with anger. "Protect it? By destroying lives? By lying and manipulating everyone around you?" As the argument escalated, none of them noticed the first wisps of smoke curling up from a far corner of the barn. An old lantern, knocked over in the commotion, had ignited some dry hay. The flames spread quickly, feeding on decades of dust and debris. It was Elena who first noticed the acrid smell of smoke. "Oh my God," she gasped, pointing to the rapidly growing fire. "We need to get out of here." Panic set in as they all realized the danger they were in. The old barn was a tinderbox, and the fire was spreading faster than any of them could have imagined. They rushed towards the door, but a burning beam crashed down, blocking their exit. "This way," James shouted, leading them towards a back exit. But as they reached it, they found the door jammed, rusted shut from years of disuse. The smoke was thickening, making it hard to breathe. Sophie stumbled, overcome by the fumes. Elena caught her, struggling to support her daughter's weight. "Help!" Elena cried out, her eyes watering from the smoke. "Please, we need to get her out." Isabella stood frozen for a moment, the gravity of the situation washing over her. This was her fault. All of it, the lies, the manipulation, and now this. In that instant, she made a decision. "James," she called out, her voice strong despite the chaos around them. "Help Elena with Sophie. I'll try to clear the main door." "Aunt Isabella, no!" James protested. "It's too dangerous." But Isabella was already moving, fighting her way through the smoke towards the blocked entrance. She could feel the heat of the flames, hear the ominous creaking of the barn structure above her. But none of that mattered now. For the first time in years, she knew exactly what she had to do. With strength born of desperation, Isabella began to push, and pull at the fallen beam. The wood was hot, searing her hands, but she didn't stop. She could hear the others coughing behind her, could sense the fire closing in. "Come on," she grunted, straining with all her might, and then, miraculously, the beam began to move. "Hurry," she shouted, holding the beam up with trembling arms. "Get out now!" Elena and James half-carried, half-dragged Sophie through the opening. As they passed, Elena's eyes met Isabella's for a brief moment. In that glance, a lifetime of hurt, anger, and now a glimmer of understanding passed between them. James was the last one through. "Aunt Isabella, come on," he urged, reaching back for her. But Isabella knew. The moment she let go of the beam, the way would be blocked again, and she could feel her strength fading. "Go, James," she said, managing a small smile. "Take care of them. Make this right." "No," James cried, but Elena pulled him back just as the beam slipped from Isabella's grasp, crashing down once more. The last thing Isabella saw was the three of them stumbling to safety before the smoke and flames engulfed her. Outside, as the sirens of approaching fire trucks filled the air, Elena, Sophie, and James watched in horror as the old barn collapsed in on itself. The truth of what had just happened slowly sank in. Isabella Harper, the woman who had orchestrated so much pain and deception, had given her life to save them all. As the flames reached towards the sky, casting an orange glow over the Harper estate, a chapter of their shared history came to a fiery close. But from the ashes of tragedy and deceit, the possibility of forgiveness, redemption, and a new beginning began to emerge. The soft glow of sunset bathed the Harper family's lakeside cabin in warm hues of orange and pink. On the spacious deck overlooking the water, Daniel, Elena, and Sophie sat in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. It had been 3 months since the tragic fire that claimed Isabella's life, and this retreat was their first attempt at truly coming together as a family. Daniel's fingers absently traced the rim of his coffee mug as he watched a pair of ducks glide across the lake's smooth surface. The past few months had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings, press conferences, and difficult conversations. Harper Industries had taken a hit, but with transparency and a commitment to change, they were slowly rebuilding their reputation. Elena's voice broke the silence, soft but steady. "I've been thinking about Isabella a lot lately." Daniel turned to her, noting the mix of emotions playing across her face. "What about her?" Elena sighed, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I spent so many years angry at her, even when I didn't know who she was or what she'd done. But now I don't know. Her final act, saving us, it's complicated everything." Sophie, who had been quietly sketching the lake view, set down her pencil. "I've been struggling with that too," she admitted. "I want to hate her for what she did to our family. But then I remember her face in that barn, the way she looked at us before." Her voice trailed off, the memory still raw. Daniel reached out, squeezing his daughter's hand gently. "It's okay to have conflicting feelings," he said. "What Isabella did was wrong, there's no question about that. But people are complex. Her last act doesn't erase the past, but it does show that there was more to her than just her mistakes." Elena nodded slowly. I think I'm ready to forgive her," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not for her sake, but for ours. Holding on to that anger, that hurt, it's exhausting." Daniel felt a wave of emotion wash over him. He had been grappling with his own feelings towards his sister, torn between the love he had for her and the pain caused by her actions. "I think that's incredibly brave of you, Elena," he said softly. Sophie leaned into her mother's side, resting her head on Elena's shoulder. "Does forgiving her mean forgetting what she did?" "No, sweetheart," Elena replied, wrapping an arm around her daughter. "It just means we're choosing not to let the pain of the past control our future. We remember, we learn, but we don't let it define us." As the sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting long shadows across the deck, Daniel felt a shift in the air. There was a lightness, a sense of possibility that hadn't been there before. "I have something I want to talk to you both about," he said, sitting up straighter. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about the company, about our family's legacy." Elena and Sophie turned to him, curiosity in their eyes. "I want to make some changes," Daniel continued. "Big ones. I want to shift our focus more towards sustainable energy, towards projects that will make a real difference in the world. And I want you both to be a part of it." Sophie's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" Daniel smiled, feeling more certain of this decision than he had of anything in a long time. "And I mean, I want to create a new division within Harper Industries focused on environmental conservation and sustainable farming practices. And I want you, Sophie, to lead it." Sophie's mouth fell open in shock. "Me? But I don't know anything about running a company." "You know more than you think," Daniel said gently. "You've got a passion for the land, for doing what's right. That's something that can't be taught. The rest we can figure out together." Elena squeezed Sophie's hand, her eyes shining with pride. "You'd be amazing at it, sweetheart, and think of the good you could do." Sophie sat back, her mind clearly racing with possibilities. "I'd need to think about it. It's a big responsibility." Daniel nodded, understanding. "Of course. Take all the time you need. But know that I believe in you, in what you could bring to the company." He turned to Elena, his heart swelling with love for the woman who had come back into his life against all odds. "And Elena, I was hoping you might consider coming to work with us too. Your experience in small-scale farming, your connection to the community, it could be invaluable." Elena's eyes widened in surprise. "Daniel, I don't know what to say." "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything," he replied, taking her hand in his. "We lost so many years, Elena. I don't want to waste any more time. I want us to build something together, all of us, a legacy we can be proud of." As the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the trees, casting the lake in shades of purple and blue, the three of them sat together, the possibility of a new future stretching out before them. There was still healing to be done, trust to be rebuilt, but in that moment they felt like a true family. Sophie was the first to break the comfortable silence that had fallen over them. "So if I do take this job, does this mean I have to start calling you Dad at the office?" she asked, a mischievous glint in her eye. Daniel laughed, the sound echoing across the water. "Only if you want to thoroughly confuse all our employees." Elena joined in the laughter, and soon all three of them were giggling, the tension of the past few months finally beginning to melt away. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Daniel looked at the two women beside him, his daughter so full of potential and passion, and Elena, the love he had lost and found again. He felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. Their journey was far from over. There would be challenges ahead, wounds that still needed time to heal fully. But here in this moment, Daniel knew that they had laid the foundation for something beautiful. A family united not just by blood, but by choice, by love, and by a shared vision for the future. As they headed inside, the cabin warm and inviting against the cool night air, Daniel felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And that, he realized, was the greatest gift of all. 1 year had passed since that fateful night at the lakeside cabin. The Harper family stood together on the stage of a packed auditorium, the buzz of excitement palpable in the air. Today marked the official launch of Harper Sustainable Futures, the new division of Harper Industries spearheaded by Sophie. Daniel stepped up to the microphone, his eyes scanning the crowd. Journalists, environmental activists, industry leaders, and curious members of the public filled every seat. They took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady and clear, "today marks not just a new chapter for Harper Industries, but a new direction for our entire approach to business. For too long, corporations have prioritized profits over people, short-term gains over long-term sustainability. Today we say, no more." As Daniel spoke about the company's new initiatives in renewable energy, sustainable farming, and community development, he couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. This was so much more than just a business venture. It was a chance to right past wrongs, to build a legacy that truly made a difference. Elena watched from the side of the stage, her heart swelling with love and admiration. The past year had been a whirlwind of change, challenges, and growth. There had been difficult moments, late-night arguments over strategy, tearful conversations as they navigated their new family dynamic, and the constant pressure of public scrutiny. But through it all, they had emerged stronger, more united than ever. As Daniel introduced Sophie, Elena felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. Her daughter, once a quiet farm girl, now stood tall and confident before a sea of faces. Sophie's passion for environmental conservation had blossomed into a true talent for leadership and innovation. "Thank you, dear Mr. Harper," Sophie said with a small smile, eliciting a chuckle from the audience. "Harper Sustainable Futures isn't just about making our company more environmentally friendly. It's about reimagining the very role of business in society. We believe that profit and purpose can coexist, that we can build a thriving economy while also nurturing the planet that sustains us." As Sophie outlined their plans for partnering with small farmers, investing in cutting-edge green technologies, and revitalizing rural communities, Elena felt a sense of awe. This was her daughter, their daughter, carrying forward a vision that united the best of both her parents: Daniel's business acumen and Elena's connection to the land. The presentation concluded to thunderous applause. As the family made their way off stage, they were immediately swarmed by reporters and well-wishers. Daniel fielded questions with practiced ease, while Sophie engaged in animated discussions with environmental experts who had attended the launch. Elena hung back slightly, still not entirely comfortable in the spotlight. She felt a hand on her arm and turned to see James, a tentative smile on his face. "That was quite something," he said softly. "Sophie was incredible up there." Elena nodded, studying her nephew's face. The past year had been difficult for James as well. The truth about his involvement in Isabella's schemes had come to light, and while he had avoided legal consequences thanks to his cooperation with the investigation, rebuilding trust with the family had been a slow and painful process. "She really was," Elena agreed. "How are you doing, James? I know this can't be easy for you." James sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's complicated. I'm proud of what we're doing, of the changes we're making, but sometimes I can't help but wonder if I deserve to be a part of it, after everything that happened." Elena reached out, squeezing his hand gently. "Redemption is a journey, James. What matters is that you're trying, that you're committed to doing better. That's all any of us can do." Their conversation was interrupted by Sophie bounding over, her face flushed with excitement. "Mom, did you see? Dr. Reeves from the Environmental Defense Fund wants to partner with us on a new reforestation project." Elena laughed, pulling her daughter into a hug. "I saw, sweetheart. You were amazing up there." As they made their way through the crowd towards the exit, Elena caught sight of Daniel speaking with Marcus Blackwood, his former rival. The two men shook hands, their body language suggesting a truce, if not quite friendship. Outside, the late afternoon sun bathed the city in a warm glow. As they waited for their car, Daniel wrapped an arm around Elena's waist, pulling her close. "What do you think?" he murmured. "Did we do okay?" Elena leaned into him, a sense of contentment washing over her. "We did more than okay," she said softly. "We did something wonderful." As they drove home, the conversation in the car was animated. Sophie couldn't stop talking about all the potential projects and partnerships that had emerged from the launch. James chimed in with insights on financial structuring and investment strategies. Daniel and Elena exchanged glances, both marveling at how far they had come. That evening, as the sun set over the city, the family gathered on the terrace of Daniel's penthouse apartment. The mood was celebratory, but there was also a sense of reflection in the air. "Thought I wish Mom could have seen this," James said quietly, swirling the wine in his glass. I think she would have been proud in the end." A moment of silence fell over the group, each lost in their own thoughts of Isabella. It was Sophie who finally spoke. "I think she is proud," she said softly, "wherever she is, and I think she'd be happy to see us all together like this." Daniel raised his glass, his eyes shining with emotion. "To Isabella," he said, "and to new beginnings." As they clinked glasses, Elena felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. The road that had led them here had been long and painful, filled with loss and betrayal, but it had also brought them to this moment, a moment of unity, of purpose, of love. Later that night, as Daniel and Elena stood alone on the terrace, looking out over the twinkling lights of the city, Elena felt a slight shiver run through her. "Cold?" Daniel asked, pulling her closer. Elena shook her head, smiling up at him. "No, just overwhelmed, I think. In a good way. If you had told me a year ago that this is where we'd be." Daniel nodded, understanding. "It's been quite a journey, hasn't it?" "It's putting it mildly," Elena laughed softly. "But I wouldn't change it. Not if it meant losing us." So Daniel turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Elena," he said, his voice suddenly serious. "I know we've talked about this before, but after everything that's happened, everything we've been through, I want to do this right." He dropped to one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Elena's breath caught in her throat as he opened it, revealing a beautiful understated ring. "Elena Parker," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion, "will you marry me? For real this time, no disappearances, no lost memories, just you and me and the family we've built together." Tears spilled down Elena's cheeks as she nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "Yes," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, of course, yes." As Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into a deep kiss, Elena felt as though her heart might burst with joy. Their story had been one of loss, of secrets and pain, but it had also been one of resilience, of love that endured against all odds. As they held each other under the starlit sky, both Daniel and Elena knew whatever challenges the future might hold, they would face them together as a family united by love, forgiveness, and a shared vision for a better world. The end of one chapter, but the beginning of so many more. Life's journey is rarely straightforward. It's filled with unexpected turns, heartbreaking losses, and moments that test our very souls. But even in our darkest hours, hope remains. Daniel and Elena's story reminds us that love can endure against all odds. It shows us that the bonds of family, whether by blood or by choice, can be our greatest strength. Their tale teaches us that it's never too late for second chances, for redemption, or for new beginnings. Remember, your past doesn't define you. It's how you choose to move forward that matters. Like Sophie, you have the power to turn pain into purpose, to use your experiences as fuel for positive change. Forgiveness, as Elena discovered, isn't about forgetting the wrongs done to you. It's about freeing yourself from the burden of anger and resentment. It's a gift you give yourself as much as others. In the end, life is about the connections we make, the love we share, and the difference we choose to make in the world. So cherish your loved ones, stand up for what you believe in, and never lose hope, because even after the darkest night, the sun will rise again, bringing with it the promise of a new day and the chance to write your own story of love, resilience, and triumph. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey through the lives of Daniel, Elena, and Sophie. We hope their story of love, redemption, and new beginnings has touched your heart as much as it has touched ours. If you enjoyed this tale of family, forgiveness, and second chances, we'd love to hear from you. Please leave a comment with the number 1 if you found the story engaging and inspiring. Curious about what might happen next in the Harper family saga? If you're eager for a potential part 2, let us know by commenting with the number 2. Your interest fuels our creativity. We value your thoughts and opinions. If there were aspects of the story you didn't quite agree with, or if you have any suggestions, please share your feedback in the comments. Your insights are important to us and help us improve our storytelling. Lastly, if you'd like to support our team and stay updated on more captivating stories like this one, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support means the world to us and enables us to continue creating content that moves and inspires. Thank you for being a part of our storytelling community. We can't wait to embark on more adventures with you.